I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. We are Real Estate Elevated. We're coming at you with another edition of I'm moving to North Carolina, now what? This time we're breaking down the North Carolina contract timeline. So let's start at the beginning. You've found the perfect house, you've gone under contract. What do you do next? Well, to kick it off, there's a couple of deposits that are going to immediately be due to the seller as well as your closing attorney or somebody else who can hold it in escrow. So, due diligence, let's talk about that first. Your due diligence deposit is due as soon as you go under contract, but due diligence is kind of interesting. It's actually 3 different things. So it's a window of time. It's the first half of our contract period. Due diligence is also the act of research, so doing some inspections, which we'll get into in a second, as well as the deposit itself, because that seller is taking it off the market and allowing you to do all of these things and to discover future material facts. So to start off with the window of time, and this one can be a little iffy due to the fact that the window of time can be as low as 0 days, meaning you really don't have a due diligence period, upwards of about 18 days. Now keep in mind, land is a special case here. Land has a much longer due diligence. We're not even going to talk about that today, but if it's land that you're buying, you're going to see some variations in the contract timeline that we're talking about right now. The other thing with the goal of due diligence is to do all of your inspections. That's going to be everything from a general inspection to your radon inspection, septic, well, and pest. We actually have some separate videos, definitely check those out, that dive a little bit deeper into what each of those inspections are, or you can check out our video on inspections with Lee Warner. But to get into the other facets of things that are covered during the due diligence period is your appraisal, as well as ordering a survey. Surveys are kind of interesting because they don't always come back before the end of the due diligence period, but they're still really important to order simply because you want to know about the lines of the property and whether or not you have anything called an encroachment. An encroachment means that something from either your property is going onto the neighbors or the neighbors is coming onto yours. Typically, your closing attorney will address that at the closing table, but it's always good to kind of hash those things out before the contract closes. So after you've done your due diligence and you've discovered all of the things, you've gotten any specialists that are needed to come out to the property and do their investigations as well, then we renegotiate the contract. We actually can go back to the table and talk to the sellers and ask for either repairs to be done or concessions to be given if something's discovered that could be a big cost for the buyer. Remember, all of these things, once the seller knows of them, becomes material fact. So once those contract negotiations are finished, due diligence ends. So that due diligence period is usually where most of the action happens. So the second half of the contract period is actually known as the earnest time period. Earnest really doesn't get as much action as due diligence because most of the work has been done. However, there is an earnest deposit that does come with that time period. Typically, it's much smaller in comparison to due diligence. And the one big thing about earnest versus due diligence is earnest sits with the closing attorney. There are some firms that can also hold it in a trust account, but typically it's held with the attorney versus due diligence, which the seller holds on to until closing. So earnest, you're going to hear a lot of radio silence up until about 3 days out from closing. So when you get 3 days out from closing, you're going to hear again from your lender, from the closing attorney, and everybody else that you've had interaction with during the contract period. This is your opportunity to verify the ledger, to verify that every single deposit you've made or any concessions that were agreed upon are now represented and will be on the closing or settlement statement. Once those 3 days are up, closing day is finally here. So what happens on closing day? Well, the first thing is you're going to want to do a final walkthrough. The final walkthrough is really important, and this is not a step to be missed. It's really important to verify a few things. Number one, is the home still in the same condition it was the day you went under contract? Again, the sellers oftentimes, unless it's a vacant home, are still living in the home, and so damage could have occurred during that time period. Another thing to think about is they've hired vendors, like movers, to move things out of the property. Accidents do happen, so it's always good to make sure anytime there's an opportunity for human error that you're verifying whether or not something did happen. The biggest thing too is making sure the seller didn't accidentally leave things behind that shouldn't have been there, like extra moving boxes or trash, storage items. Sellers are great at convincing themselves that the buyer will need these things, like extra cleaning supplies and stuff of that nature. and then also making sure they didn't take anything with them that's supposed to convey. So there is a list in the contract of things that are supposed to convey. If it's nailed, glued, screwed, bolted, or buried in the ground, it's supposed to come with the property automatically. But some things can be a little finicky, like for example TV mounts. Often they're attached to the TV that the seller plans to take with them. However, the mount is supposed to stay on the wall. That's probably a pretty common item that we see accidentally get taken, but keep in mind those were agreed upon per the contract. So I have seen these things actually hold up closing before, so it's really important that you're aware of what stays and what goes. Once that final walkthrough has been completed, you verified that all the utilities worked properly, so rerunning all of the things that have water, flushing all the toilets, putting on all the lights and all of that. If everything's on the up and up, you're then going to go to the closing table. At the closing table, you will sign copies of all your lending documents as well as the deed to the house. It will be filed with downtown, and once the deed records, that's when you get the keys and you become the new homeowner. That is the completion of the contract. So if you are looking for more tips and tricks and information about buying real estate here in North Carolina, be sure to like and follow us on YouTube and podcasts everywhere. I'm Laura Richardson.
All right, y'all, thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like, share, and follow us on Instagram as well as YouTube. We're also on Apple Podcasts. Again, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate.